In 323 BC, the death of Alexander the Great at the age of 32 triggered the fragmentation of his empire. Lacking a clear, stable successor, his leading generals, known as the Diadochi, began contesting for control over different regions. Over subsequent decades, they carved up Alexander's conquests into distinct Hellenistic kingdoms, reshaping the political landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean. By the early 3rd century BC, three principal successor states had emerged: the Antigonid Kingdom in Macedon and Greece, the Seleucid Empire centered in Syria and Asia Minor, and the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt. Macedon remained a central power in mainland Greece. Under the Antigonid dynasty, Macedonian rulers sought to maintain their influence both northwards and within the Greek peninsula. The political fragmentation of Greece allowed Macedon to assert leadership over various Greek city-states, although this dominance was neither uncontested nor uniformly stable. Meanwhile, two major regional federations had come to prominence: the Aetolian League in central and western Greece, and the Achaean League in the Peloponnese. These leagues combined military and political functions, shaped local governance, and occasionally challenged Macedonian authority. The Aetolian League was a confederation of tribal and city-state communities. Over time, it developed significant military capacity, particularly in light infantry and rapid-moving warbands. The League's decentralized structure gave it both flexibility and instability. The Achaean League, by contrast, was more centrally organized and was associated with a number of powerful Peloponnesian city-states. Both leagues engaged in alliances, rivalries, and wars, and their shifting allegiances contributed to a degree of persistent Greek political instability. Hellenistic Greece in this period was shaped not only by internal rivalries, but also by the influence of foreign powers. Macedon periodically sought to reassert dominance over Greek states, while the Seleucid and Ptolemaic kingdoms projected power through diplomacy, marriage, and war. In parallel, Greek cities maintained strong traditions of autonomy, often resisting external domination via delicate diplomacy or by leveraging league alliances. Meanwhile, economic life in Greece remained vigorous. Commerce thrived in the Aegean and Ionian seas, aided by a network of ports, while interior regions engaged in agricultural production. Cultural interaction, philosophy, science, drama continued to flow across the Hellenistic world, even as political structures remained fragile. In this unstable milieu, Rome was rising in the West. The Roman Republic of the early 3rd century BC had evolved from a regional power on the Italian peninsula into a dominant force in central Italy. Since expelling the Etruscan kings in the late 6th century BC, Rome had established a system of alliances and partial dominion over neighboring Italian states, including the Latin League and numerous hill communities. By the early 3rd century, Rome had already fought and defeated several of its Italian rivals, consolidating control over most of the Italian peninsula. Rome's expansion brought it into confrontation with the powerful maritime Republic of Carthage. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC, saw Rome engage Carthage in a protracted naval conflict for control of Sicily. The war ended with Roman victory, and Sicily became Rome's first province. This marked a decisive shift. Rome was no longer merely an Italian power, but a Mediterranean one. In the century that followed, Rome continued to expand, subduing Sardinia and Corsica and turning its attention increasingly to the Western Mediterranean. During the Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, Rome faced Carthage under the command of Hannibal. Hannibal's campaign included his famous crossing of the Alps, pitched battles at Lake Trasimene, 217 BC, and Cannae, 216 BC, and years of conflict in Italy. At the same time, Roman diplomats maintained contact with Greek states. Several Hellenistic rulers watched Rome's struggles with Carthage closely, calculating whether to intervene, ally, or exploit any opportunity presented by Roman preoccupation. Among these rulers was Philip V of Macedon, who saw potential in aligning with Carthage to press his own ambitions. In Macedon, Philip V ascended the throne in 221 BC at a young age following the death of his father, Demetrius II. He inherited a kingdom that had long-standing grievances over its diminished Hellenistic standing and the challenge of asserting influence over the Greek mainland. Philip was energetic and militaristic, determined to restore Macedon's prestige. He embarked on campaigns to secure Macedonia's borders, extend its influence, and rebuild its naval capacity in the Aegean Sea. Philip's ambitions coincided with a critical moment in Roman history. The Second Punic War absorbed Rome's military resources, leaving the western and northern frontiers relatively exposed to new challenges. Philip recognized a strategic opening. By forming a military alliance with Carthage, he could potentially distract Rome, benefit from Carthaginian assistance, and expand Macedonian power into regions that Rome might neglect. At the same time, Greek leagues such as the Aetolian and Achaean Leagues continued to maneuver among the great powers. The Aetolian League frequently weighed its options between siding with Macedon, allying with Rome, or occasionally soliciting support from other Hellenistic kingdoms. The Achaean League, generally more stable in structure, also evaluated the shifting geopolitical balance, offering and breaking alliances in response to Macedonian pressure or Roman overtures. During this period, the Greek mainland remained economically and militarily fragmented, a patchwork of city-states, leagues, and minor leagues, each with its own interests. Cities such as Sparta, Corinth, Argos, and Megalopolis held different relationships with the dominant powers. Corinth, for instance, was a major commercial hub. Sparta, though once dominant in classical Greece, had declined politically but still retained symbolic authority. The maintenance of their autonomy depended on their ability to navigate the alliances and enmities of stronger states. To the east, the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus III, later known as Antiochus the Great, was consolidating control over Asia Minor and exerting influence across the Aegean. The Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, under Ptolemy IV and his successors, exerted power in the southern Greek world, particularly through alliances, patronage, and trade. Yet, despite the influence of these Hellenistic powers, their reach into mainland Greece was uneven, and their capacity for sustained intervention in Greek internal conflicts was limited, especially when compared to the more immediate threat posed by Macedon. Meanwhile, Rome's interest in the Greek world was not merely opportunistic. It was also shaped by economic and diplomatic considerations. Roman ambassadors began to travel to Hellenistic courts, and some Greek city-states welcomed diplomatic missions, recognizing that Rome could be a useful counterweight to Macedonian aggression. Merchants from the Greek world also engaged in trade with Italy, particularly through Italian ports and the Western Mediterranean, facilitating cultural and economic exchange. Over time, Roman citizens and soldiers would serve in Hellenistic states as mercenaries, further knitting the two spheres. By the early 3rd century BC, then, the conditions for a cross-Mediterranean confrontation were set. Macedon, under Philip V, possessed both motive and means to extend its influence. Greek leagues remained politically fragmented and frequently at odds. Rome, despite being preoccupied with Carthage, had expanded its power beyond Italy and was becoming entangled in Hellenistic geopolitics. The combination of Roman diplomatic reach, Macedonian expansionism, and unstable Greek alliances provided the structural foundation for Rome's first intervention in Greece. At the same time, military innovations and strategic capacities made such intervention feasible. Macedon maintained a professional army rooted in the Macedonian phalanx, supported by cavalry and naval forces. Greek leagues contributed infantry and light troops, while Roman legions had honed their military organization, discipline, and engineering capabilities. Commerce and resource flows between Greece and Italy increased the stakes. Control over Aegean trade routes, ports, and islands acquired importance for both Rome and Macedon. Furthermore, the political doctrine of freedom and sovereignty among Greek city-states served as a rhetorical tool that Rome would later employ to justify intervention. Many Greek communities feared Macedonian dominance and saw in Rome a countervailing power capable of restraining Macedon. That rhetorical appeal would become central when Rome chose to justify its involvement in Greek wars as a defense of liberty, even though Rome's own ambitions were steadily growing. By 214 BC, these long-developing trends had culminated in a high-stakes geopolitical environment. Macedon, increasingly aggressive and strategically aligned, was ready to test the limits of Roman interest. Greek states were deeply divided and vulnerable. Rome, though engaged in a major war with Carthage, had developed contacts, alliances, and diplomatic networks in the Greek world. These conditions made it possible for Rome to intervene in Greek affairs, and for Greece to become the next major theater in Rome's expansion. Thus, as 214 BC approached, the Mediterranean world stood at an inflection point. The Hellenistic kingdoms remained powerful, but internal fragmentation in Greece created persistent instability. Macedon, led by an ambitious king, was poised to expand. Rome, now a Mediterranean republic with growing reach, was increasingly drawn into Greek affairs, not just as a distant observer, but as an emerging arbiter and future conqueror. In 221 BC, Philip V had firmly established himself as king of Macedon following the death of his father, Demetrius II. Young yet politically astute, Philip inherited a kingdom that possessed long-standing territorial ambitions in the Hellenistic world. He was deeply aware that Macedon's future influence hinged not only on its traditional foothold in the Greek mainland, but also on projecting power across the Adriatic and the Aegean seas. Under his rule, Macedon began to rebuild and expand both its military capacity and diplomatic reach. At the same time, the Roman Republic was embroiled in its most urgent and existential conflict, the Second Punic War with Carthage. Hannibal's audacious invasion of Italy in 218 BC, crossing the Alps, Philip V perceived in Rome's preoccupation with Carthage a rare opportunity. He concluded that if he allied with Carthage, he might distract Rome, secure military assistance, and advance his own ambitions in the Adriatic region. His vision encompassed not only Macedonian dominance in the Balkans, but also control over Illyrian territories and influence among the Greek city-states. To realize these aims, Philip opened diplomatic channels with Hannibal. In 215 BC, he dispatched envoys to Carthage, proposing an alliance. These envoys communicated Macedon's desire to restrain Rome's power in the Adriatic and Italy in exchange for military cooperation. Hannibal, already deep in Italy and seeking partners to stretch Rome's resources, welcomed the proposal. In this way, a formal alliance between Macedon and Carthage took shape, known later to Roman sources as the Treaty of Phoenix Precursor Alignment. Philip V also sought leverage in the Greek world. He cultivated relationships with the Achaean League, a powerful confederation in central and western Greece. The Achaean League's decentralized structure and tradition of raiding made it a potential partner in Philip's designs. At the same time, Philip courted smaller Greek states and islands, including cities in the Aegean. He aimed to project naval power by rebuilding and expanding the Macedonian fleet, which had been neglected in earlier decades. In parallel, Roman diplomats reacted to these developments. While Rome's main armies were deployed in Italy and Hispania, Roman envoys undertook missions to Hellenistic courts. Roman leadership recognized that Philip's outreach to Carthage posed a strategic threat. If Philip secured Carthaginian support, Rome's supply lines and communications in the Adriatic could be compromised. Furthermore, an alliance between Macedon and Carthage raised the possibility that Macedonian forces could undertake raids across the Dalmatian coast, threaten Roman allies, and open a new front. Rome's responses, however, were carefully measured. The Senate dispatched diplomatic missions rather than immediate large-scale military intervention. Roman envoys visited Greek states to cultivate alliances and assess the balance of power. Of particular interest to Rome were the Aetolian and Achaean Leagues, as well as maritime powers such as Rhodes and Pergamon. These states were themselves wary of Macedonian expansion and could serve as useful partners against Philip's designs. In Greece, the Aetolian League observed Macedon's maneuvers with ambivalence. Some Aetolian leaders regarded Philip's alliance with Carthage as dangerous, given the seismic risks of entangling Macedonia with a distant Western power. Others saw potential benefit. If Macedon grew too strong, they might secure Roman aid to restrain it later. The Aetolians remained internally divided between those favoring Macedon and those more inclined toward Rome, and this internal division played into Philip's calculations. Likewise, Pergamon, under the Attalid dynasty, had strategic reasons to fear a strong Macedon backed by Carthage. Pergamon controlled key territories in Asia Minor, but its interests on the Greek mainland were limited. Still, the Attalid kings maintained diplomatic networks in Greece and the West, including Rome. Pergamon's rulers understood that Macedonian dominance in the Aegean and the Western Balkans could undermine their influence. They therefore watched Philip's moves warily, ready to align with Rome or other states to contain him. Rhodes, a maritime power and important commercial hub in the Aegean, was also alert to developments. Its fleet and economic interests depended on stability in the Aegean Sea, and any Macedonian-Carthaginian alliance threatened Rhodian trade. Rhodes had long-standing rivalries with Macedon, especially in the Aegean Islands, and the prospect of Macedon gaining naval strength so close to its bases was less than appealing. Rhodes thus had a motive to support Rome if it meant checking Philip's ambitions. Another factor complicating Philip's strategy was Macedon's own internal economic condition. Macedon relied significantly on agricultural output, grain and timber, and on revenues derived from mining within its mountainous territories. Maintaining and expanding a navy required substantial resources, especially timber for shipbuilding, and manning fleets required both skilled sailors and trained marines. Financing an expanded military posture, combined with diplomatic outreach, placed pressure on the Macedonian treasury. For Philip, allying with Carthage offered not just strategic advantage, but also potential access to additional military support or diversion of Rome's resources. Rome, for its part, recognized the need to balance its resources carefully. It could not afford a full-scale campaign in Greece while it was still contesting Carthage in Italy and Spain. Yet it was also clear that allowing Philip, aligned with Carthage, to operate unchallenged could expose its western frontiers. The Senate opted for a cautious but proactive diplomatic policy rather than immediate war. It sought to deter Philip through alliance building rather than launching a major intervention. During this period, envoys from Rome met with representatives from the Achaean League. The Roman envoys argued that a Macedonian-Carthaginian alliance posed a clear threat not only to Rome, but to Greek autonomy. They emphasized that Macedon's ambitions would undermine the independence of Greek city-states and offered support in return for cooperation. The Aetolians, despite their internal divisions, recognized that Rome's strategic interest aligned in certain respects with their own desire to check Macedonian power. At the same time, the Achaean League, while less directly involved in initial negotiations, monitored the developments closely. The Achaeans maintained a more institutionalized political structure than the Aetolians, which made them somewhat more stable but also less nimble in foreign affairs. Achaean leaders were cautious, preferring to wait and see how the Macedonian-Carthaginian alliance would evolve before committing to any particular alignment. Their reluctance reflected a broader strategic uncertainty among Greek states. In 214 BC, as the diplomatic tension increased, Philip V made a further strategic move. He initiated naval operations across the Adriatic. Macedonian fleets attacked Illyrian and coastal cities. These operations were not large-scale amphibious invasions designed immediately to seize large territories, but they served as demonstrations of Macedon's growing maritime capability. Such naval forays signaled to both Rome and Greek states that Philip was serious about extending influence beyond the land. Meanwhile, Roman allies in the region, notably in southern Italy and along the Adriatic coast, reported Macedonian raiding activity. These reports heightened alarm in Rome and underscored the material risk posed by Philip's naval ambitions. For Roman strategists, the Adriatic littoral was critical. Control of ports and coastal routes could threaten Rome's communications and supply lines, especially if Macedon and its potential Carthaginian alliance were permitted to gain strength in that region. Another concern for Rome lay in the capacity for Mediterranean trade. Greek city-states, especially in the Aegean, maintained significant commercial networks. Macedon's emergence as a maritime power threatened to disrupt these networks. The Rhodian and Pergamene elites understood the economic stake. Stability in the Aegean was necessary for trade, while Macedonian dominance could reorient maritime traffic and favor Macedonian ports. At the same time, internal politics in Rome played a role. The Roman Senate, made up of aristocratic elites, was acutely aware that any military engagement in Greece would demand additional funds and manpower. Recruiting more troops, paying for supply lines, and extending Roman military commitments into the eastern Mediterranean would stretch Rome's resources. Yet the Senate judged the risk of inaction to be greater than the cost of diplomatic and limited military engagement. In addition to diplomatic missions, Rome employed financial inducements. It promised subsidies and aid to Greek states that opposed Macedon's expansion. These subsidies were not merely symbolic. Rome pledged coin, military support, and political backing to leagues and city-states that aligned against Philip's ambitions. This financial hedging made the Roman offer credible to those Greek states that questioned whether Rome would commit seriously. Philip, for his part, attempted to reassure some of his Greek neighbors. He argued that his alliance with Carthage was defensive rather than expansionist. He consulted with allies in the Achaean League, offering shared plunder and favorable garrisons. He emphasized his capacity to protect Greek cities from external threats, suggesting that Macedon could serve as a stabilizing force. Yet behind his diplomacy, he maintained plans to strengthen Macedon's fleet and to broaden his influence in the Adriatic. Throughout this phase, the balance of power in Greece remained unstable. While Philip had growing strength, his alliance with Carthage created deep insecurity among Greek city-states and Rome alike. The Aetolian League remained divided. The Achaean League remained cautious. Pergamon and Rhodes viewed the developments with concern. Rome's response, diplomatic mobilization, subsidy, alliance building, was calculated to prevent Philip from consolidating a military coalition capable of challenging Roman interests in the Adriatic or intervening in Italy. By 214 BC, the preconditions for open conflict had come into sharper relief. Philip's alignment with Carthage and his renewed naval posturing across the Adriatic clearly signaled his intention to pursue a more expansive maritime strategy. Greek states that they once viewed Macedon as a traditional Hellenistic power, but now perceived that power as a potential threat to regional autonomy. Rome, still largely absorbed by the war with Hannibal, nonetheless recognized that delay could result in a strategic disadvantage. Philip could entrench his power in Illyria, threaten Roman supply lines, and draw in Greek allies on his side. The strategic alignment between Macedon and Carthage, however, remained tentative. Philip's envoys had negotiated terms, but real operational coordination with Carthage was limited. The logistics of a joint war against Rome were complex. Carthage was focused on the Italian theater. Its capacity to ship troops or naval forces to support Macedon was constrained by its own military commitments. Philip, in turn, was cautious. He understood that a Carthaginian partnership carried risk. If Carthage lost decisively in Italy, Macedon could be left isolated. Thus, his alliance, while dangerous to Rome, was not yet a guarantee of large-scale Macedonian-Carthaginian cooperation. Nonetheless, for Rome, Philip's maneuvering represented enough of a threat to merit serious consideration. The Senate continued to send envoys, and Rome's financial commitments to Greek states increased. The Roman strategy was to contain Macedon diplomatically by cementing alliances with leagues and city-states, rather than to open a new front with large legions, at least until the Second Punic War allowed greater flexibility. In parallel, some Greek states began covert preparations. The Aetolian League raised additional troops. Pergamon reassessed its naval capacity. Rhodes strengthened its maritime defenses. While these states did not yet declare war, their military readiness and diplomatic alignments increasingly favored checkmating Philip's ambitions. The internal divisions within Greek federations ensured that no single power could effectively oppose Philip alone, but in coalition with Rome, they could present a formidable counterforce. By the latter part of 214 BC, as diplomatic missions continued and maneuvers escalated, the foundations for what would become the First Macedonian War had solidified. The conditions were now met. Philip V was strategically aligned with a major Roman enemy. His naval and territorial ambitions were increasingly credible, and Rome had secured the interest of several Greek powers willing to balance against Macedon. The stage was set for the opening of hostilities, though Rome would proceed cautiously, mindful of its commitments in Italy, but compelled to act to prevent a dangerous realignment in the eastern Mediterranean. The First Macedonian War commenced in 214 BC, rooted in the preceding diplomatic and strategic maneuvers of Philip V of Macedon and the Roman Republic. Philip's ambitions to expand Macedonian influence into the Adriatic region, combined with his alignment with Carthage during the ongoing Second Punic War, prompted a calculated Roman response. However, the scale of engagement in Greece remained constrained, as Rome's primary military focus continued to be directed against Hannibal in Italy. The war, therefore, was characterized by a reliance on Greek allies, indirect campaigns, and sporadic engagements rather than large-scale, continuous military operations. At the outset, Philip mobilized Macedonian forces along multiple fronts. His primary objective was to secure influence over the western Greek and Illyrian regions, leveraging the geographic proximity to the Adriatic Sea. Macedon's military structure consisted of the traditional Macedonian phalanx, a dense formation of heavily armed infantry armed with sarissas, supported by cavalry and auxiliary forces. Philip also sought to reinforce his naval capacity, deploying fleets along the Aegean coast to protect shipping lanes and project power into the Ionian Sea. This dual land and sea strategy reflected Philip's intent to control both terrestrial and maritime routes critical for trade and strategic movement. Rome, constrained by ongoing operations against Hannibal, adopted a strategic posture emphasizing alliances and proxy engagements. The Senate coordinated with the Achaean League, Pergamon, and later Rhodes, offering support and financial subsidies to encourage containment of Macedon. These alliances allowed Rome to extend its influence without committing significant legions directly to the Greek theater. The Achaean League, in particular, served as a key instrument in the containment strategy, providing troops, local knowledge, and raiding parties to challenge Macedonian control in central and western Greece. The initial phase of the war involved limited incursions into Macedonian-held territories. Philip attempted to assert control over Illyrian cities such as Lissus, Apollonia, and Epidamnus, aiming to secure supply lines and establish forward bases for operations across the Adriatic. In response, the Achaean League conducted guerrilla-style operations and raids against Macedonian garrisons, targeting both military installations and economic resources. These engagements, while not decisive in themselves, disrupted Macedonian logistics and demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated regional resistance supported by Rome. Simultaneously, diplomatic negotiations continued to play a crucial role in the war's dynamics. Rome dispatched envoys to various Greek states, emphasizing the threat posed by Macedon and promising protection of autonomy. Pergamon's rulers, the Attalid kings, reinforced their positions, providing limited military contingents to aid the Aetolians. Rhodes, concerned with safeguarding maritime commerce, mobilized its fleet to patrol the Aegean and deter Macedonian naval operations. This coalition building reflected a broader Roman strategy to shape a network of regional powers capable of counterbalancing Macedonian ambitions without requiring full-scale Roman intervention. Philip's operational strategy in Greece focused on a combination of offensive maneuvers and alliance building. He sought to bring neutral or opportunistic Greek states under Macedonian influence, offering favorable terms, tribute arrangements, and guarantees of protection. This approach met with mixed success. Some communities, particularly in western Greece, acceded to Macedonian authority either through coercion or pragmatic calculation, while others remained aligned with Rome or resisted through localized military actions. These variable alignments contributed to the fragmented nature of the conflict and limited the potential for decisive large-scale engagements. Throughout the war, the Macedonian army faced logistical and strategic constraints. Maintaining forces across dispersed territories required secure supply lines, particularly in the mountainous regions of central and western Greece. Seasonal campaigning was limited by climate and terrain, which constrained mobility and reduced the frequency of sustained engagements. Likewise, naval operations were dependent on the timely construction and manning of ships, as well as favorable weather for navigation. Macedonian forces occasionally demonstrated operational initiative, but were hindered by the dispersed and contested nature of the theater. The war's military engagements, though numerous, did not produce decisive victories. Skirmishes, raids, and sieges occurred sporadically, reflecting the limited resources of both Macedon and its opponents, as well as Rome's reliance on proxies. Philip attempted to consolidate control over key towns and fortresses, while Aetolian and allied forces countered through harassment and opportunistic attacks. The lack of large-scale, set-piece battles contributed to the war's inconclusive outcome. Engagements were often measured in terms of territorial raids, limited fortifications captured, or temporary disruption of enemy supply lines, rather than permanent occupation or destruction. Naval operations formed a critical dimension of the war. Macedonian fleets patrolled the Ionian coast and sought to assert control over strategic islands and ports. Aetolian, Rhodian, and Pergamene naval forces countered these efforts, conducting blockades, escorting Allied shipping, and preventing Macedon from dominating the Adriatic trade routes. Control of the sea lanes remained contested throughout the conflict, shaping both operational planning and the movement of troops and supplies. Macedon's inability to establish unchallenged maritime dominance limited the scope of its operations and reinforced Rome's strategic reliance on allied states. The political landscape within Greece further complicated the war. City-states and leagues often shifted allegiance based on immediate military pressures, economic considerations, and local rivalries. The Aetolian League, for instance, engaged in internal debates over the extent to which they should collaborate with Rome. Some factions feared excessive Roman influence, while others prioritized restraining Macedon. Similarly, other Greek polities navigated between compliance with Macedon and coordination with Rome, attempting to preserve autonomy while avoiding confrontation. These political dynamics resulted in a war that was as much diplomatic and strategic as it was military. Financial considerations also shaped the conduct of the war. Macedon required substantial revenues to maintain its army and fleet, prompting Philip to levy tributes on subject territories and pursue resources in contested regions. Rome, conversely, offered subsidies and material support to allied Greek states to encourage sustained resistance. The combination of Macedonian taxation and Roman financial inducements influenced local loyalties, recruitment, and operational capacity. Economic pressures, therefore, played a key role in shaping both strategic choices and tactical actions. The war's progression revealed structural weaknesses in Macedonian strategy. Philip's ambitions were constrained by the need to secure multiple fronts, the limitations of long-distance coordination with Carthage, and the resilience of Greek and allied resistance. Conversely, Rome's cautious approach, focusing on diplomatic alignment and financial support rather than direct intervention, limited immediate losses while ensuring Macedon's expansion was contained. This indirect approach demonstrated the Republic's capacity to influence foreign conflicts through coalition building, a pattern that would recur in subsequent Greek wars. Despite the absence of decisive battles, the conflict had notable consequences for Greek geopolitics. The continued instability in the western Greek regions demonstrated the limitations of Macedonian authority. Cities and leagues resisted, sometimes successfully, and Macedon's inability to establish full control undermined its strategic credibility. Simultaneously, Roman influence increased, not through conquest, but through diplomacy, alliance building, and support of Greek partners. The war thus established Rome as an emergent actor in Greek affairs, setting precedents for its later interventions. The conclusion of the First Macedonian War came with the Peace of Phoenix in 205 BC. The treaty was negotiated to end hostilities without resolving underlying territorial disputes. Macedon retained control over certain Western Greek territories, while Rome and its allies maintained influence over regions allied to the Achaean League. The treaty effectively froze the strategic situation, leaving Macedon strong but checked, and establishing Rome's formal entry into Greek politics. Importantly, the war did not produce sweeping territorial changes, but it confirmed the Republic's capacity to shape Hellenistic geopolitics without full military commitment. In addition to political consequences, the First Macedonian War demonstrated the interaction between military, economic, and diplomatic factors in Hellenistic conflicts. Macedon's phalanx-based army, reliant on disciplined infantry formations, proved effective in controlled engagements but was limited in sustained operations across dispersed and mountainous territories. Allied Greek forces, while less heavily armed, used mobility and local knowledge to counter Macedonian advances. Naval power remained a critical determinant in controlling trade and supply routes. The war's outcome underscored that strategic alliances and economic inducements were as consequential as battlefield victories. The war also influenced subsequent Greek-Roman relations. Greek city-states and leagues had experienced Rome as a power capable of affecting outcomes through diplomacy, subsidy, and selective military involvement. Macedon, meanwhile, recognized the limitations of expansion in the face of coordinated resistance supported by Rome. These realizations informed Philip's later policies, as well as the strategies of other Hellenistic rulers in the eastern Mediterranean. The First Macedonian War, though inconclusive militarily, marked the beginning of sustained Roman involvement in Greek affairs and shaped the strategic calculations of all parties involved. Ultimately, the First Macedonian War was a conflict defined by its constraints. Geographic, logistical, and strategic limitations prevented either side from achieving decisive results. Macedon's ambitions were tempered by Rome's diplomatic and allied network, while Rome's preoccupation with Carthage dictated a cautious approach. Greek city-states exercised agency within these constraints, shifting alliances and pursuing local interests. The war produced no decisive territorial reconfigurations, yet it established critical precedents. Rome is an actor in Greek politics, the utility of alliances in extending influence, and the strategic vulnerability of Macedon to coordinated opposition. The Second Macedonian War began in 200 BC against a backdrop of continued instability in the Greek world following the inconclusive First Macedonian War, 214 to 205 BC. Philip V of Macedon, having consolidated his position in the western Greek territories and the Adriatic, resumed efforts to expand Macedonian influence across the Greek mainland and the Aegean. Philip's strategic focus included not only territorial expansion, but also the assertion of naval dominance, economic control of key trade routes, and the creation of a network of alliances among Greek city-states and leagues. His renewed ambition, however, increasingly alarmed other Hellenistic powers, including the Kingdom of Pergamon, the Maritime Republic of Rhodes, and Rome, which had been observing developments in Greece closely since its first military engagement. In Asia Minor, the Attalid Kingdom of Pergamon, under Eumenes II, had strategic interests in maintaining access to Aegean trade routes and protecting its territorial borders. Macedon's ambitions threatened Pergamon's security indirectly, as Macedonian influence over Greece could allow Philip to project naval power into the Aegean Sea, interfere with trade, and destabilize allied city-states. Pergamon's rulers, therefore, initiated diplomatic contacts with Rome, seeking support to counterbalance Macedon. Rhodes, similarly motivated by commercial and security concerns, acted to maintain maritime stability, fearing the rise of Macedonian naval capacity along critical sea lanes. Rome, emerging from the Second Punic War with Hannibal and consolidating its control over Italy and its western Mediterranean holdings, was prepared to expand its influence eastward. Roman political and military leaders assessed that Philip's ambitions represented a threat to both Greek autonomy and Roman strategic interests in the region. They also recognized that allied states such as Pergamon and Rhodes could serve as multipliers of Roman influence, providing local forces intelligence and access to ports and supply networks, thereby minimizing the need for direct Roman occupation at the outset of hostilities. The immediate cause of the Second Macedonian War was a series of petitions from Greek states requesting Roman intervention. The Achaean League, though internally divided, sought Roman assistance against perceived Macedonian aggression. Pergamon and Rhodes formally appealed to Rome, presenting Philip as a threat to the independence of Greek cities and a destabilizing force in the Aegean. Rome's Senate, interpreting these appeals as consistent with both strategic interest and opportunity for influence, authorized military intervention in 200 BC. This marked a shift from the previous conflict. Rome moved from diplomatic containment and proxy warfare to direct military engagement in Greece. Philip V, aware of Roman capabilities and the limited readiness of his Greek allies, initially pursued a combination of defensive and opportunistic strategies. Macedonian forces were deployed to key regions, including Thessaly, Epirus, and western Greece, to protect strategic towns, secure supply routes, and maintain the integrity of alliances with sympathetic city-states. At the same time, Macedon sought to consolidate naval control by fortifying ports and dispatching fleets along the Aegean and Ionian coasts, aiming to safeguard trade routes. assert maritime authority, and challenge Rhodian and Pergamene influence. Roman strategy in the Second Macedonian War emphasized the combination of military force and coalition building. Roman commanders, operating with contingents of legions transported across the Adriatic, coordinated with Greek allies to challenge Macedonian positions. Early campaigns focused on Thessaly and western Greek cities, where Macedonian garrisons were less entrenched and local populations were willing to support Rome. The collaboration between Roman legions and allied forces such as Aetolian and Pergamene contingents enabled Rome to conduct simultaneous operations across multiple fronts, disrupting Macedonian communications and preventing the concentration of Philip's forces in any single region. Naval operations constituted an essential element of the campaign. Macedon's fleet, though significant in terms of ships and manpower, faced opposition from the combined naval forces of Rhodes and Pergamon, supplemented by Roman logistical support. These fleets patrolled the Aegean, secured trade corridors, and prevented the reinforcement or resupply of Macedonian coastal holdings. Control of maritime space proved critical, particularly for cities reliant on grain imports or maritime commerce, as naval dominance allowed allies to project influence while restricting Macedonian movement. The war's operations revealed key contrasts in military organization. The Macedonian phalanx, characterized by dense infantry formations armed with sarissas, remained highly effective in set-piece engagements, particularly on flat terrain. Roman legions, by contrast, relied on more flexible manipular formations, capable of adapting to variable terrain, responding to flanking maneuvers, and integrating cavalry and auxiliary troops effectively. These structural differences in military doctrine became increasingly apparent during engagements in Thessaly, where the topography favored flexible, combined arms tactics. Roman commanders leveraged these tactical advantages to challenge Macedonian forces, emphasizing mobility, reconnaissance, and coordinated assaults with allied contingents. Throughout the campaign, Philip attempted to secure additional alliances among Greek states and leagues. Some city-states offered conditional support, often motivated by fear of Roman reprisal or by the expectation of Macedonian protection. Philip's diplomacy sought to reassure allies through tribute arrangements, promises of autonomy under Macedonian oversight, and coordinated military planning. Despite these efforts, the fragmented nature of Greek political structures limited Macedon's ability to marshal a cohesive coalition, and shifting allegiances often undermined operational planning. By 198 BC, Roman forces, now reinforced after the conclusion of hostilities in Italy and Spain, intensified campaigns in Thessaly and central Greece. The Roman consul Titus Quinctius Flamininus emerged as a key commander, coordinating legions with allied Greek contingents in a series of operations designed to isolate Macedonian garrisons, secure strategic passes, and control key cities. Flamininus' campaigns involved careful logistical planning, coordination with local forces, and systematic sieges of towns holding strategic or symbolic value. Macedon's responses were constrained by limited manpower, the necessity of defending multiple fronts, and the disruption of supply lines by allied raiding parties. In 197 BC, the Second Macedonian War culminated in the Battle of Cynocephaly, a decisive engagement illustrating the contrasting military doctrines of Rome and Macedon. The battle occurred in Thessaly, where undulating terrain created challenges for the traditionally rigid Macedonian phalanx. Roman legions, utilizing manipular flexibility, were able to exploit gaps in the phalanx formation, outflank units, and coordinate attacks with cavalry and light infantry. Macedonian forces, although disciplined and numerically significant, were unable to respond to the dynamic maneuvers of Roman legions. The battle resulted in a decisive Roman victory, with Macedonian forces suffering significant casualties and disorganization. Following the defeat at Cynocephaly, Philip V entered negotiations with Roman authorities. Terms imposed by Rome restricted Macedon's capacity for military operations. Limitations were placed on the size of the Macedonian army, fortifications were restricted, and naval expansion was curtailed. Furthermore, Macedon was required to withdraw from certain Greek territories, ceding influence in the region. Philip, while retaining the core of his kingdom, accepted these limitations as a condition for peace, recognizing Rome's emerging dominance as an arbiter in Greek affairs. In 196 BC, Flamininus presided over the Isthmian Games, where Rome formally proclaimed the freedom of the Greeks. This declaration, carefully orchestrated for maximum political effect, reinforced Rome's image as a protector of Greek autonomy, even as its influence became entrenched. Greek city-states were nominally independent, but now operated under the watchful supervision of Roman authorities. The proclamation also served a diplomatic function, signaling to other Hellenistic powers, including the Seleucid Empire and Ptolemaic Egypt, that Rome was a decisive actor capable of projecting military and political power into the Eastern Mediterranean. The Second Macedonian War had lasting consequences for the Greek world. Macedon's military capacity was curtailed, limiting its ability to dominate the Greek mainland. Rome's presence and influence in the region were formalized through alliances, treaties, and strategic oversight, establishing patterns that would shape future interventions. Greek city-states, while formally autonomous, increasingly relied on Roman arbitration for conflict resolution, military support, and political recognition. The war also demonstrated the effectiveness of Roman military doctrine against traditional Hellenistic formations, a precedent that would inform future campaigns in Greece and Asia Minor. Economic factors influenced both the conduct and outcomes of the war. Macedon faced the challenge of maintaining forces across multiple theaters, financing garrisons, and supplying fleets. Rome, in contrast, leveraged the resources of allied states, combining financial subsidies with coordinated military campaigns. Control of trade routes, particularly in the Aegean and along key Adriatic ports, remained central to strategic objectives. Cities aligned with Rome gained protection and access to trade networks, while those under Macedonian influence experienced disruption and taxation to support war efforts. Diplomacy continued to shape post-war outcomes. Rome, having established credibility and influence through military success, acted as mediator among Greek states and leagues. Philip's adherence to peace terms reinforced the Republic's authority and signaled the consequences of resistance. Simultaneously, the war demonstrated the limitations of Macedonian power when confronted with coalition-based strategy, logistical constraints, and superior tactical flexibility. The Second Macedonian War also set the stage for Rome's broader engagement in the Eastern Mediterranean. By intervening decisively in Greek affairs, establishing alliances, and imposing strategic limitations on a major Hellenistic power, Rome had transitioned from a regional Italian power into a significant player in Hellenistic geopolitics. Subsequent conflicts involving the Seleucid Empire, Pergamon, and other Hellenistic states would build upon the foundations laid during this period, with Rome increasingly positioning itself as the ultimate arbiter of Greek autonomy and security. The Roman-Seleucid War, 192 to 188 BC, unfolded against the backdrop of newly established Roman influence in Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean following Rome's victory in the Second Macedonian War. In the years after 197 BC, Rome had imposed significant constraints on Macedon and declared the freedom of the Greeks at the Isthmian Games in 196 BC. As Roman power extended in the region, tensions grew between Rome and other Hellenistic states, especially the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus III, also called Antiochus the Great. Antiochus III had consolidated control over much of the Seleucid domains, including Syria, Asia Minor, and parts of the Near East. By the early 190s BC, he turned his attention to Greece, seeing an opportunity to re-establish Seleucid influence among Greek states and to project power westward. In parallel, the Achaean League, dissatisfied with the outcome of the Second Macedonian War and Rome's increasing dominance, began to maneuver. Some Aetolians resented Roman interference and the settlement of 197 to 196 BC, believing that Macedonia still posed less danger than Rome, or that Rome's promises of Greek freedom were ultimately self-serving. They therefore sent embassies to Antiochus III in 192 BC, assisting him in Greece. Antiochus accepted the invitation. He presented his intervention as a defense of Greek freedom against Roman overreach, appealing to pan-Hellenic sentiment rooted in shared traditions and past wars. He claimed a mission to liberate the Greek cities from foreign domination, though his strategic interest was clearly grounded in realpolitik, establishing a western frontier, expanding Seleucid influence into the Aegean, and challenging Rome's emergence as a dominant power. In preparation for war, Antiochus organized a substantial force. He assembled both a naval and a land army drawn from his eastern territories and Asia Minor. His fleet included warships capable of operating in the Aegean Sea, and his ground forces comprised phalanx infantry, cavalry, and auxiliary troops drawn from his vassal states. He also secured alliances with some Greek states, or at least political sympathies, especially within the Achaean League, which expected that Seleucid intervention might restore a balance of power in Greece. Rome, having emerged victorious in the Second Macedonian War, took the Aetolian invitation seriously. The Senate debated the strategic risks of confronting Antiochus. Many Roman leaders interpreted Seleucid intervention in Greece as a direct challenge to Roman interests. In Rome's judgment, allowing Antiochus to secure a foothold in Greece and the Aegean would undermine Roman influence and potentially threaten its allies. The Senate authorized a military response, mobilizing forces to Greece and the Aegean to prevent Seleucid consolidation. Roman forces in Greece were reinforced by contingents drawn from allied Greek states, including Pergamon and Rhodes. These states had their own reasons to oppose Seleucid expansion. Pergamon, under Eumenes II, feared Antiochus's growing naval strength and potential encroachment on Asia Minor. Rhodes, a major maritime power, worried that Seleucid fleets might challenge Rhodian control of sea lanes, endanger its trade, and reconfigure the balance of power in the Aegean. The combined Roman-Greek armada aimed to block Seleucid ships, secure key sea routes, and deny Antiochus the ability to land large forces in Greece or to transport supplies freely. The war formally began in 192 BC as Roman and Allied forces prepared for coordinated operations. On land, Roman legions moved into Greece, while at sea, joint fleets patrolled the Aegean and the Ionian coasts to intercept Seleucid movements. The Seleucid army made initial landings in Greece, and diplomatic efforts accompanied military preparations. Antiochus established winter quarters in Thessaly and sought to consolidate support among local Greek cities sympathetic to his cause, especially within the Achaean League. Antiochus attempted to expand his base of operations by encouraging Aetolian revolts against pro-Roman cities, offering gold, troops, and political guarantees. These efforts produced mixed results. Some Aetolian cities backed him, while others hesitated, uncertain of the strength and sustainability of his intervention. Rome, in turn, deployed legions and allied infantry to counter these moves, reinforcing cities in Thessaly and central Greece to prevent the defection of key towns. In 191 BC, the conflict escalated significantly. Roman forces under the consul Manius Acilius Glabrio engaged Seleucid units in Thessaly and central Greece. Skirmishes broke out near strategic towns and mountain passes. The Roman strategy emphasized containment, preventing Antiochus from consolidating a broad territorial base, splitting his forces, and denying him secure supply lines. Allied Greek forces under Roman command held defensive positions, fortified key cities, and coordinated with Roman logistics to sustain their operations. At sea, the joint Roman, Pergamene, Rhodian fleet exerted pressure on the Seleucid navy. The Allied fleet sought to control the Aegean, prevent Seleucid reinforcements from Asia Minor, and protect Greek coastal cities. Naval battles and blockades disrupted Seleucid supply lines, making it more difficult for Antiochus to transport provisions or reinforce his land contingents in Greece. As the war progressed into 190 BC, Antiochus recognized that his position in Greece was precarious. His lines of communication across the Aegean were vulnerable, and Roman allied forces remained active in both land and maritime theaters. He decided to consolidate his forces and to take decisive action. He moved his army toward Asia Minor, intending to regroup and reinforce. Simultaneously, he reordered his chain of command, placing trusted officers in critical strongholds and delegating authority to maintain control in the regions he already occupied. In 190 BC, the key confrontation of the war took place at the Battle of Magnesia in western Asia Minor, near Thyatira. Roman forces under the command of Lucius Cornelius Scipio, often called Scipio Asiaticus, coordinated with Pergamene troops led by Eumenes II. The Seleucid army, under Antiochus III, deployed a phalanx supported by heavy cavalry and war elephants. The terrain was relatively open, favoring formations capable of mass deployment. During the battle, Roman and Pergamene forces used their infantry and cavalry to fix Seleucid units in place while maneuvering aggressively around the flanks. The Roman manipular formations exploited gaps, and Roman cavalry engaged Seleucid horsemen. The Pergamene contingent played a significant role, engaging in close combat with phalanx elements and contributing to a broader strategy of attrition. The Seleucid war elephants, while imposing, were difficult to control in the chaos of battle and failed to deliver a decisive effect. The defeat of Antiochus at Magnesia was severe. Seleucid losses were substantial in manpower, and many of their elephants and heavy units were neutralized or routed. Antiochus withdrew his remaining forces in disarray. His capacity to sustain large-scale operations in Asia Minor and Greece was significantly diminished. The defeat at Magnesia represented not only a tactical loss, but also a strategic turning point. Antiochus could no longer threaten Greek or Pergamene interests with the same force. Following the battle, negotiations commenced. In 188 BC, the Treaty of Apamea was signed. Under the terms of this treaty, Antiochus III ceded to Rome and its allies the Seleucid territories in Asia Minor west of the Taurus Mountains. He also agreed to pay a large indemnity over many years, deliver hostages, including royal family members, and limit his naval capacity. The treaty imposed restrictions on the size of his army and forbade war elephants, significantly reducing Seleucid military power. Moreover, Antiochus had to guarantee that no Seleucid warships would sail west of certain points, effectively limiting his maritime reach in the Aegean. The Treaty of Apamea imposed a strategic reorientation on the Seleucid Empire. With its western territories gone and its naval ambitions curtailed, the Seleucid Empire refocused on its eastern domains. The loss marked a major diminution of Seleucid influence in the Aegean and Greek world. By contrast, Rome solidified its role as the dominant power in Greece and Asia Minor. The treaty effectively extended Roman influence into the eastern Mediterranean, not through direct annexation, but through diplomatic and political supremacy. The war's consequences for the Greek states were profound. The Achaean League, which had invited Antiochus, found itself on the losing side. Its hopes of using Seleucid power to check Rome had failed. Many Aetolian cities were punished or lost status, and the League's influence declined. Pergamon emerged stronger. Under its Attalid leadership, it consolidated power in Asia Minor and gained favor with Rome. Rhodes likewise benefited from the war's outcome, as its maritime position was secured and its trade routes remained open under a Roman-dominated order. Greek city-states, more than ever, recognized that Rome had become an indispensable arbiter and guarantor of security. Economically, the war reshaped the balance of power. Rome and its allies gained access to new territories and trade connections. The financial indemnities imposed on the Seleucids had far-reaching implications. They weakened Antiochus's economy, forced resource reallocations, and reduced his ability to wage large-scale wars. For Rome, the redistribution of Seleucid territory and the establishment of favorable political conditions strengthened its network of allied states in the region. Politically, the war contributed to Rome's transformation from a regional Italian power into a major actor in Hellenistic geopolitics. Rome's military and diplomatic success demonstrated its capacity to project power beyond Italy, not just through conquest, but through treaty-making and alliance networks. The Republic's involvement in Greek affairs became more systemic and institutional. Roman envoys, military commands, and political influence became fixtures in the eastern Mediterranean. From a military perspective, the war underscored differences in doctrine. The Seleucid phalanx and war elephant tactics, while formidable, were less effective when faced with the flexibility, discipline, and combined arms approach of Roman legions and allied forces. The logistical challenges of coordinating large armies across the Aegean and Asia Minor also exposed the limits of Seleucid power projection. Rome's ability to marshal coalitions, to coordinate land and naval operations, and to sustain prolonged campaigns reinforced its strategic edge. The Roman Seleucid War, 192 to 188 BC, thus marked a major turning point in Mediterranean power dynamics. By successfully countering Seleucid intervention in Greece, Rome not only preserved its influence among Greek states, but also enforced a settlement that weakened a major Hellenistic rival. The Treaty of Apamea established a new order. Roman-backed states in Asia Minor diminished Seleucid reach and an enhanced role for Rome as the principal power in the eastern Mediterranean. The Third Macedonian War began in 171 BC against the backdrop of ongoing tensions between Rome and Macedon following the settlement of the Second Macedonian War, 200 to 197 BC, and the subsequent political restructuring of the Greek world. Philip V of Macedon had been defeated and constrained by the Romans, and his death in 179 BC brought to the throne his son, Perseus of Macedon. Perseus inherited a kingdom weakened by imposed limitations on military power and constrained territorial influence, but he sought to restore Macedonian authority and reassert the kingdom's position within the Hellenistic world. The geopolitical environment of the late 170s BC remained volatile, with Rome extending influence across Greece, Macedonia's neighbors consolidating power, and the Seleucid Empire and other Hellenistic states observing Roman ascendance. Perseus's early reign was marked by a careful balance of diplomacy, internal consolidation, and military preparation. He sought to rebuild the Macedonian army within the restrictions imposed by Rome, focusing on the phalanx infantry, supplemented by cavalry units, auxiliary troops, and mercenaries from neighboring regions. Perseus also engaged in diplomacy with Greek city-states and leagues, attempting to secure allies and neutralize opposition. The Achaean League and various Thessalian states remained key regions of interest, as their alignment could either facilitate or hinder Macedonian resurgence. Perseus emphasized legal reforms and economic stabilization to strengthen the kingdom internally, recognizing that Rome closely monitored Macedonian capabilities and that any overt military buildup risked triggering Roman intervention. The immediate cause of the Third Macedonian War involved both Roman strategic concerns and Perseus' political and military maneuvers. Rome perceived any attempt by Macedon to restore its former power as a potential threat to the balance established after the Second Macedonian War. Reports of Perseus engaging in clandestine diplomacy with Greek states, forming alliances with tribes in Illyria, and seeking to strengthen military capabilities alarmed the Roman Senate and consuls. Rome feared the formation of coalitions that could challenge its influence in Greece or threaten allied states in the region, including Pergamon, Rhodes, and Thessalian cities aligned with Rome. Diplomatic missions and envoys were exchanged, with Rome issuing warnings to Perseus to refrain from actions deemed provocative, but negotiations failed to resolve the underlying tensions. In 171 BC, the Roman Senate authorized the mobilization of legions to confront Macedon. The decision reflected a strategic assessment of Macedonia as a potential threat to Roman interests in the Balkans and Greece. Rome coordinated with Greek allies, including Pergamon and the Aetolian League, to assemble a coalition force capable of confronting Perseus on multiple fronts. The war was therefore characterized by both Roman initiative and Allied cooperation, employing combined operations to contain Macedonian forces and prevent consolidation of power by Perseus. The Macedonian army at the outset of the war comprised approximately 40,000 infantry, including the traditional Macedonian phalanx, supported by a cavalry contingent of roughly 5,000 horsemen. Auxiliary units and allied contingents, drawn from Thessaly, Illyria, and other neighboring regions, supplemented these core forces. The phalanx remained central to Macedonian military doctrine, emphasizing dense formations of pikemen wielding sarissas, coordinated with supporting cavalry for flanking and rapid maneuver. Despite Roman-imposed limitations after the Second Macedonian War, Perseus sought to maximize the effectiveness of his army through disciplined training, strategic deployment, and utilization of terrain advantages in engagements. Roman forces mobilized to meet Macedon included legions totaling approximately 30,000 infantry, organized into manipular formations, supported by allied Greek infantry and cavalry contingents. Roman military doctrine emphasized flexibility, combined arms coordination, and adaptability to terrain. The legions were supplemented by auxiliary units equipped to counter phalanx formations, including light infantry and skirmishers. Roman commanders, including Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, applied lessons from previous conflicts in Greece, emphasizing strategic encirclement, reconnaissance, and integrated operations with allied forces. Naval operations, though secondary, provided logistical support and secured maritime supply routes to prevent interference from coastal Macedonian forces. Initial campaigns in 171 BC involved maneuvering and positioning rather than large-scale engagements. Both Roman and Macedonian forces sought to control key passes, river crossings, and fortified cities in Thessaly and Western Macedonia. Macedon attempted to consolidate influence over allied Greek states, ensuring loyalty through treaties, subsidies, and military support. Rome, in turn, reinforced strategic cities, coordinated with local allies, and prepared for offensive operations. The conflict also included skirmishes and raids designed to probe defenses, disrupt supply lines, and weaken the opponent's operational capability rather than decisive pitched battles. The early years of the war highlighted logistical challenges for both sides. Macedon's reliance on mountainous terrain and dispersed fortifications complicated troop movements and communications. Roman operations, while benefiting from disciplined organization, had to contend with unfamiliar terrain, extended supply lines, and the coordination of allied contingents with varying capabilities. Both sides employed foraging, fortification, and local intelligence gathering to sustain campaigns, demonstrating the interplay of operational planning, geographic constraints, and tactical execution in Hellenistic warfare. By 169 BC, engagements became more direct. Perseus concentrated forces in strategic locations to prevent Roman penetration into central Macedonia and to protect key cities. Roman legions, under experienced commanders, advanced through Thessaly and into Macedonian territory, employing sieges and direct assaults on fortified towns to undermine Macedonian defensive capacity. Battles and skirmishes tested the relative effectiveness of Roman manipular formations against the Macedonian phalanx, with terrain playing a decisive role in shaping outcomes. Roman flexibility, coupled with coordinated allied action, began to erode Macedonian control over contested areas. Diplomacy and intelligence continued to influence the war. Roman envoys monitored Macedonian alliances, while Perseus sought to secure support from Greek states and peripheral regions, including the Illyrian tribes. Both sides attempted to sway neutral city-states through political promises, subsidies, or threats. These efforts reflected the integrated nature of military and political strategy in Hellenistic warfare, where battlefield outcomes alone were insufficient to secure long-term advantage without corresponding diplomatic success. The decisive phase of the Third Macedonian War culminated in 168 BC with the Battle of Pydna, fought on the plains of southern Macedonia. Roman forces under consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus confronted the Macedonian army in a terrain characterized by rolling hills and open fields, conditions favorable for Roman manipular tactics. The Macedonian phalanx deployed in its traditional dense formation, with sarissa-armed infantry fronted by supporting units and cavalry on the flanks. Perseus relied on the cohesion of his phalanx and the strength of his flanks to repel Roman assaults and maintain the integrity of his army. The battle unfolded with an initial Macedonian advance, pressing Roman positions and engaging in close-quarters combat. Roman commanders maintained discipline among legions, using manipular flexibility to respond to phalanx thrusts, create gaps, and exploit terrain irregularities. Cavalry units on both sides engaged in attempts to flank or disrupt formations, while light infantry skirmishers harassed enemy ranks. As the battle progressed, Roman manipular units exploited a key disruption in the Macedonian phalanx caused by uneven terrain. The rigid formation of the phalanx could not adjust effectively to gaps or changes in elevation, allowing Roman legions to penetrate and outflank segments of the Macedonian line. The collapse of the phalanx led to the rapid disintegration of Macedonian forces. Perseus's cavalry attempted to regroup and cover the retreat of the infantry, but Roman coordination and allied support prevented effective withdrawal. Casualties were substantial, with thousands of Macedonian soldiers killed or captured, while Roman losses were comparatively lower due to the tactical advantage gained through flexibility and maneuver. The decisive nature of the battle ended Macedonian military resistance and marked the failure of Perseus' attempts to restore Macedonian power. Following Pydna, Rome undertook the systematic dismantling of Macedonian political and military structures. The monarchy was abolished, and the kingdom was divided into 4 republics under Roman oversight, each with restricted autonomy and military capability. These republics were required to administer internal affairs under limitations imposed by Rome, ensuring that no central authority could re-establish Macedonian dominance. Economic restrictions were applied to prevent the accumulation of resources sufficient to support renewed military campaigns, and Roman officials monitored governance, taxation, and foreign relations within the new political divisions. The Third Macedonian War significantly altered the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. The elimination of Macedon as an independent military power removed a key challenger to Roman hegemony. Greek city-states, while nominally autonomous, increasingly relied on Roman oversight and arbitration to resolve disputes. The reorganization of Macedonia provided a template for Roman management of conquered or neutralized regions, combining local administrative structures with overarching strategic control. Rome's ability to impose political restructuring without full-scale annexation demonstrated the effectiveness of combining military decisiveness with institutional oversight. Economically, the war's aftermath included the redistribution of resources formerly under Macedonian control. Roman oversight of taxation, trade, and tribute collection in the newly divided republics allowed for the extraction of economic benefit while preventing military resurgence. Allied Greek states, particularly Pergamon and Rhodes, secured favorable commercial positions, gaining access to markets previously dominated by Macedon. The war also reinforced the principle that military defeat could translate into lasting structural changes, shaping political and economic landscapes across the Hellenistic world. The Third Macedonian War underscored the evolution of Roman military doctrine in confronting Hellenistic armies. The contrast between manipular legions and the Macedonian phalanx was decisive. Roman operational flexibility, combined with coordinated use of cavalry and light infantry, allowed for adaptation to terrain and exploitation of phalanx vulnerabilities. The Battle of Pydna became a case study in the efficacy of Roman tactics over rigid Hellenistic formations, influencing subsequent military engagements in the Eastern Mediterranean. Politically, the war cemented Rome's role as arbiter and enforcer of Greek political order. By dismantling Macedon, reorganizing its territories, and imposing structural limitations, Rome not only neutralized a historical rival, but also established a framework for managing future conflicts in the region. Greek city-states increasingly recognized Rome as the ultimate authority, with diplomatic relations, alliances, and disputes subject to Roman sanction. The intervention reinforced the precedent that military success was inseparable from political and institutional control in the Hellenistic context. The Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BC, was a conflict defined by strategic caution, military preparation, and decisive tactical engagement. Perseus of Macedon, despite attempts at internal consolidation and alliance building, was unable to overcome the combined military, logistical, and strategic advantages of Rome and its Greek allies. The decisive victory at Pydna illustrated the superiority of Roman military organization against traditional Hellenistic formations, while the subsequent reorganization of Macedon demonstrated Rome's capacity to translate battlefield success into lasting political and economic control. The war marked the end of Macedonian independence as a regional power and established a framework for Roman administration and influence throughout Greece and the surrounding Hellenistic world. Following the decisive Roman victory at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, the Macedonian kingdom underwent a profound political, military, and administrative transformation. Rome, having eliminated Perseus and the Macedonian monarchy, implemented a system designed to prevent the reemergence of centralized Macedonian power while maintaining sufficient local governance to ensure stability. The kingdom was partitioned into 4 autonomous republics, each with defined territorial boundaries, internal administrative structures, and restrictions imposed by Roman authority. These divisions, often referred to as the Tetrapolis, included northern, eastern, southern, and western regions, with boundaries drawn to disrupt historical centers of Macedonian political cohesion. Each republic was allowed nominal self-governance, including the appointment of local magistrates, maintenance of civic institutions, and management of agricultural and economic affairs, but all decisions were subject to Roman oversight. The Tetrapolar division served multiple strategic purposes. First, it prevented the concentration of military power in any single administrative unit. Macedonian forces were limited in size and subject to restrictions on recruitment, armament, and fortification. Each republic was prohibited from maintaining large-scale military units capable of challenging Rome or unifying with other Macedonian territories. Second, the division facilitated Roman monitoring of local political dynamics. Governors, Roman legates, and allied envoys were stationed throughout Macedonia to supervise compliance with treaties, collect intelligence on potential unrest, and coordinate with allied Greek states to prevent insurgency. Third, the partition disrupted historical social and economic networks, reducing the likelihood of coordinated resistance while allowing Rome to extract resources efficiently through tribute, taxation, and control of strategic assets. Economically, the fragmentation had significant implications for Macedon and the broader Hellenistic world. Rome imposed limitations on the export of grain, timber, and metals from the region, redirecting these resources to support Roman military and commercial interests. Taxation systems were established within each republic, with portions of revenue allocated for administrative purposes and tribute payments to Rome. The restrictions hindered the reconstitution of Macedonian military capabilities, as funds that might have supported troop recruitment, fortification, or mercenary employment were redirected toward meeting Roman-imposed obligations. Meanwhile, allied Greek states, particularly Pergamon and Rhodes, benefited from reduced Macedonian competition in trade and increased access to Aegean maritime routes, consolidating their economic and strategic positions. Political stability in the newly divided Macedon was fragile. Each republic experienced tensions between traditional local elites, who sought to maintain influence, and the Roman authorities, who imposed structural limitations and demanded compliance with oversight mechanisms. Local magistrates, councils, and civic assemblies were permitted to operate, but they were constrained in their ability to act independently on military or foreign affairs. This arrangement generated frequent disputes over governance, taxation, and administration, often requiring direct intervention by Roman envoys or allied powers. Rome's presence in Macedonia, although not fully provincial, became increasingly prominent through regular inspection tours, military detachments, and administrative directives to enforce compliance. Socially, the fragmentation altered the dynamics of civic and elite power. Aristocratic families that had previously dominated Macedon now faced diminished authority due to the divided structure and Roman supervision. The central monarchy, a unifying institution, had been abolished, reducing the capacity of elites to mobilize collective action. Local councils assumed greater prominence in civic administration, but their power was circumscribed, and their actions were subject to Roman approval. This redistribution of authority weakened traditional patronage networks and altered patterns of political influence, fostering dependence on Roman authority for the resolution of disputes, arbitration of succession questions, and validation of policy initiatives. Military constraints remained central to Rome's strategy of control. Each Macedonian republic was limited to small defensive forces, restricted in both numbers and armament. Fortifications were either dismantled or maintained under strict regulation, and garrisoning of strategic towns was monitored by Roman and allied forces. The prohibition on assembling large armies effectively neutralized the possibility of Macedon reconstituting a unified military capable of challenging Roman dominance. The operational autonomy of military units within each republic was curtailed, ensuring that any mobilization required coordination with Roman authorities or risked immediate intervention. This system created a controlled military environment, allowing Rome to maintain influence while minimizing the expenditure of its own forces in direct occupation. The division of Macedon also had diplomatic consequences. Neighboring states, including the Greek leagues, the Illyrians, and the Thracians, observed the restructuring as a demonstration of Rome's capacity to impose political order and enforce limitations on former Hellenistic powers. Macedonia's neighbors, particularly Pergamon and Rhodes, aligned more closely with Rome, recognizing the benefits of a weakened Macedon and the protection afforded by alliance with the dominant power in Greece. The tetrapolar system served as a model for subsequent Roman interventions in the eastern Mediterranean, illustrating the effectiveness of indirect control, strategic fragmentation, and oversight mechanisms in managing complex Hellenistic political structures. During the period 168 to 150 BC, Rome maintained oversight without full annexation, relying on a combination of diplomacy, allied support, and limited military presence to enforce compliance. Roman envoys were dispatched to mediate disputes among the republics, monitor adherence to military restrictions, and oversee economic obligations, including tribute payments and resource management. These envoys frequently coordinated with local elites to address internal unrest, secure loyalty, and prevent the consolidation of resistance movements. Rome's approach emphasized stability and long-term strategic influence, ensuring that Macedon could not regain regional dominance while maintaining a manageable administrative burden on the Republic. Internal unrest periodically challenged the stability of the Macedonian republics. Peasant revolts, local disputes over taxation, and disputes between republican administrations required intervention to prevent escalation. Rome responded by deploying legions temporarily, enforcing administrative reforms, or supporting loyalist factions within each republic. The repeated interventions reinforced Roman authority and underscored the limitations of the nominal autonomy granted to the tetrapolar divisions. Macedonian populations gradually adapted to the new political order, though resentment toward foreign oversight persisted, particularly among elites who had previously enjoyed centralized control under the monarchy. The economic landscape of fragmented Macedon evolved in response to both Roman supervision and internal reorganization. Agricultural production remained the foundation of local economies, with grain, olives, and wine as primary exports. Mining operations, particularly for silver and other metals, were subject to Roman oversight to ensure contributions to tribute and to limit funding for potential military reconstitution. Commerce, previously dominated by Macedonian networks extending into the Aegean, was increasingly influenced by allied Greek states and Roman commercial agents, shifting economic power and trade flows. This reorientation reinforced Rome's ability to leverage economic dependency as a mechanism of control while facilitating integration of Macedonian resources into broader Mediterranean markets. Diplomatic relations between the Macedonian republics and neighboring powers were carefully managed by Rome. Treaties, alliances, and political agreements were monitored to prevent coordination that could challenge Roman authority. Macedonia's capacity to engage in independent foreign policy was effectively eliminated. Any negotiations with neighboring states required Roman sanction. This arrangement ensured that Macedonia remained isolated diplomatically, reducing the possibility of coalition building against Rome and consolidating the Republic's influence over regional affairs. Cultural and social continuity persisted despite political fragmentation. Macedonian traditions, civic rituals, and local governance structures were maintained within the republics, albeit under the supervision of Roman authorities. Local elites retained some ceremonial roles, while religious institutions continued to function independently of direct Roman control. This allowed for the preservation of Macedonian identity and civic life, even as political and military power shifted decisively to Rome. The balance between cultural continuity and political subjugation became characteristic of Rome's approach to governance in Hellenistic territories. During the 70 years following Pydna, the tetrapolar republics experienced cycles of stability and unrest, influenced by local leadership, external pressures, and Roman supervision. Periodic disturbances, including border disputes, economic grievances, and localized insurrections, were addressed through a combination of military intervention, diplomatic negotiation, and administrative reform. The pattern of conflict and resolution reinforced Rome's role as the ultimate arbiter, embedding the republic's authority within the Macedonian political system. The experience of Macedon during this period served as a model for managing other Hellenistic kingdoms transitioning from autonomous rule to Roman oversight. By the mid-2nd century BC, the tetrapolar system faced challenges from both internal ambition and external agitators. Local elites occasionally sought to consolidate authority, seeking to circumvent Roman restrictions, while restless populations resisted limitations on economic and political autonomy. Roman responses were consistent: targeted military intervention, enforcement of treaties, and manipulation of local governance structures to prevent reunification of power. The durability of the tetrapolar arrangement depended on Rome's capacity to sustain oversight and on the willingness of allied Greek states to support the balance of power. The administrative framework established in Macedon during this period included mechanisms for taxation, legal adjudication, and dispute resolution, all under the guidance of Roman officials or envoys. Local assemblies and magistracies managed day-to-day civic affairs, but were constrained in matters affecting military capability, foreign relations, or large-scale infrastructure projects. Resource allocation and fiscal planning were monitored to prevent diversion toward military buildup. This hybrid administrative system combined elements of local governance with overarching Roman strategic control, creating a model for indirect rule that minimized the need for full provincial occupation while ensuring compliance. The tetrapolar system also reinforced the integration of Macedon into the emerging Roman geopolitical order in the Eastern Mediterranean. The fragmentation weakened the capacity of Macedon to influence regional politics independently, creating a vacuum that Rome and its allies could exploit. Greek leagues, city-states, and neighboring Hellenistic kingdoms adjusted their diplomatic strategies in recognition of Roman oversight, aligning military, economic, and political initiatives with Roman interests. Macedonia, though formally divided and internally autonomous, became an integral component of the broader network of states under Roman hegemony. The Fourth Macedonian War, occurring between 150 and 148 BC, represented the final challenge to Roman oversight of Macedon following the restructuring implemented after the Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BC, and the subsequent establishment of the Tetrapolar republics. The war arose due to both internal dissatisfaction within Macedon and the ambitions of a claimant to the former monarchy, Andriscus, who asserted himself as the legitimate heir of Perseus, the last independent Macedonian king. The political, military, and social conditions of Macedon in the decades following Pydna created an environment in which unrest could develop. Roman-imposed divisions, the limitations on military capacity, and the constraints on local governance contributed to periodic instability and created openings for ambitious individuals seeking to restore centralized power. Andriscus, whose origins remain somewhat obscure, claimed to be the son of Perseus. He leveraged this claim to garner support among Macedonian populations dissatisfied with Roman oversight and the fragmentary republican divisions. His appeal drew on historical loyalty to the monarchy, resentment toward Roman interference, and promises of re-establishing Macedonian sovereignty. Andriscus initiated his activities in the region of Thrace, where local support was strongest and Roman monitoring less immediate. From this base, he recruited forces and secured supplies to begin his campaign to reclaim Macedonian territory. The Roman authorities, informed of Andriscus's movements and claims, initially viewed the rebellion as a localized disturbance, given the limited size of his forces and the nominal autonomy of the Macedonian republics. However, as Andriscus's support expanded, including the defection of Macedonian citizens from the Tetrapolar republics, the Senate recognized the potential for a larger-scale conflict. Roman diplomats attempted to contain the situation through warnings, the reinforcement of local garrisons, and pressure on allied Greek states to deny Andriscus logistical and military support. These measures, however, proved insufficient to suppress the rising insurgency, which quickly demonstrated both organization and determination. In 150 BC, Andriscus mobilized a force composed of local Macedonian recruits, Thracian auxiliaries, and mercenaries drawn from adjacent regions. Estimates suggest his initial army numbered between 8,000 and 10,000 troops, including light infantry, cavalry, and limited phalanx formations reminiscent of earlier Macedonian military structures. Andriscus sought to exploit the political divisions among the Tetrapolar republics, advancing rapidly into southern Macedonia to consolidate control over key cities and to win over disaffected populations. The Republican administrations, fragmented and lacking centralized command, were initially unable to mount coordinated resistance, allowing Andriscus to gain momentum. The first significant engagement between Andriscus' forces and Roman-aligned Macedonian troops occurred near the city of Amphipolis. Andriscus demonstrated tactical skill, utilizing mobility, knowledge of local terrain, and flexible deployment of infantry and cavalry to overcome Republican garrisons. His victory at Amphipolis emboldened supporters, facilitated recruitment, and underscored the limitations of the Tetrapolar divisions in preventing the resurgence of centralized military power. The success also highlighted the persistent loyalty to the Macedonian monarchy among segments of the population and the underlying instability of Roman-imposed governance structures. Following these initial successes, Andriscus consolidated power in eastern Macedonia, proclaiming himself king and seeking to re-establish traditional monarchical authority. He organized administrative structures, levied troops, and initiated efforts to secure economic resources, including taxation and control of strategic trade routes. These measures demonstrated a shift from a localized rebellion to a nascent state structure capable of confronting Roman authority and allied Greek contingents. Andriscus' proclamation of kingship marked the first direct challenge to Roman oversight since the Tetrapolar divisions were imposed, transforming the conflict into a formal war. In response, Rome mobilized a substantial military force to confront Andriscus, dispatching legions under the command of Quintus Caecilius Metellus. Roman forces numbered approximately 25,000 infantry, supported by allied Greek contingents, cavalry, and light troops. Metellus's strategic objectives included containing Andriscus's forces, recapturing cities that had fallen under his control, and restoring compliance among the Macedonian republics. The Roman campaign emphasized coordinated operations, use of fortified positions, and integration of allied intelligence to anticipate and counter Andriscus's maneuvers. The War of 149 BC unfolded with a series of engagements across southern and central Macedonia. Andriscus employed both conventional phalanx formations and irregular tactics, exploiting local terrain, ambushing Roman supply lines, and seeking to concentrate forces against isolated garrisons. Early engagements demonstrated the capacity of Andriscus to inflict tactical setbacks on Roman forces, particularly through rapid cavalry movements and the exploitation of terrain advantages. Despite these successes, the strategic depth and resources of Rome and its allies imposed a limit on Andriscus' operational flexibility. During the winter of 149 to 148 BC, Andriscus fortified positions near Pella and Amphipolis, seeking to consolidate territorial control and prepare for a decisive confrontation. Roman forces, aware of the threat posed by Andriscus's growing authority, undertook systematic operations to isolate his forces, secure loyal Republican cities, and cut supply routes. These operations included both sieges and direct assaults, leveraging Roman discipline, logistical coordination, and the superior training of legionary troops to counter Andriscus's mobile forces. In 148 BC, the decisive engagement occurred at the Battle of Pydna, distinct from the earlier 168 BC engagement, or nearby central Macedonian plains where Roman forces under Metellus confronted Andriscus's army estimated to be approximately 15,000 strong, including phalanx infantry and cavalry contingents. The Romans deployed legions in manipular formation, employing flexible tactics to counter the dense Macedonian phalanx. Roman cavalry and auxiliary units engaged in coordinated flanking maneuvers, while infantry exploited gaps in the phalanx to create disorder. The battle demonstrated the continued effectiveness of Roman military organization, discipline, and adaptability when confronting traditional Hellenistic formations. Andriscus's forces, despite high morale and initial resistance, were unable to withstand sustained Roman assaults. Terrain irregularities, disciplined Roman maneuvers, and superior logistical support contributed to the breakdown of the Macedonian phalanx. Roman legions penetrated the formation, encircled segments of the army, and neutralized cavalry threats. Casualties among Andriscus's troops were substantial, with large numbers killed, captured, or routed. Andriscus himself fled the battlefield, but was eventually captured in Thrace while attempting to regroup or escape into adjacent regions. Following the capture of Andriscus, Rome implemented measures to eliminate the possibility of further insurrection and to secure permanent control over Macedon. The tetrapolar divisions were dissolved, and Macedon was formally converted into a Roman province. Administrative structures were established under the supervision of a Roman governor, with authority over taxation, legal matters, military oversight, and diplomacy. Roman legions were stationed at strategic points to maintain order, prevent rebellion, and secure key routes and cities. Local governance was maintained in limited forms, primarily for municipal administration, but ultimate authority rested with Roman officials. The incorporation of Macedon as a Roman province had significant implications for the region's political, military, and economic landscape. Politically, the province provided Rome with direct oversight, removing the need for indirect management through autonomous republics. Local elites were incorporated into administrative and civic functions, but with clearly defined limitations on autonomy and authority. The military restructuring allowed Rome to maintain permanent garrisons capable of rapid response to unrest, ensuring stability and reducing the likelihood of resurgence by royalist or nationalist movements. Economically, Roman administration facilitated the integration of Macedonian resources into broader Mediterranean trade networks. Taxation, tribute, and resource extraction were coordinated under provincial oversight, supporting both local governance and Roman strategic interests. Mines, agricultural production, and commercial routes were organized to provide sustainable economic contributions to Rome while preventing the accumulation of resources that could support future military uprisings. The Roman provincial framework combined the exploitation of local economic potential with mechanisms to enforce strategic security. Socially, the transition from fragmented republics to a Roman province affected population dynamics, elite structures, and civic institutions. Macedonian citizens adjusted to direct Roman oversight, including new legal frameworks, fiscal obligations, and administrative hierarchies. Traditional elite families were co-opted into municipal administration or integrated into provincial advisory councils, preserving some social continuity while ensuring loyalty to Roman authority. Civic institutions, religious observances, and local traditions persisted but operated within the constraints of Roman provincial policy. Diplomatically, the establishment of the Roman province of Macedon reinforced Rome's influence across the Hellenistic world. Neighboring states observed the consolidation of Macedon under direct Roman control, recognizing both the strategic capacity of Rome to enforce compliance and the consequences of rebellion. Greek city-states, the Achaean League, and other Hellenistic powers adjusted their diplomatic policies in recognition of Rome's direct authority, aligning military, political, and economic strategies with the interests of the Republic. Macedon's transformation into a province served as a model for subsequent Roman administrative practices in Greece and the wider Eastern Mediterranean. The Fourth Macedonian War demonstrated the continued vulnerability of Hellenistic kingdoms to both internal and external pressures in the post-Pydna period. Andriscus's revolt, although short-lived, illustrated persistent loyalty to the monarchy, dissatisfaction with Roman oversight, and the potential for localized uprisings to escalate into regional conflicts. Rome's decisive military response, followed by provincial organization, effectively eliminated these threats and reinforced the principle that military victory would be consolidated through structural and administrative measures, rather than merely battlefield success. The war also highlighted the evolution of Roman military and administrative capabilities. Legionary forces, supported by allied contingents, successfully combined operational flexibility, logistical coordination, and tactical superiority to suppress a numerically smaller but regionally supported insurgency. The subsequent establishment of Macedon as a province demonstrated Rome's capacity to translate military success into enduring political and administrative control, setting a precedent for future integration of Hellenistic territories into the Roman state. Culturally, the incorporation of Macedon into the Roman provincial system facilitated increased interaction between Greek and Roman societies. Civic institutions, educational practices, and cultural traditions continued under provincial oversight, allowing the persistence of Macedonian identity while exposing populations to Roman administrative, legal, and military frameworks. Over time, the integration of Macedon contributed to the diffusion of Hellenistic culture into Roman domains and reinforced the dual process of Roman political control and cultural assimilation that characterized the Eastern Mediterranean in the 2nd century BC. By 148 BC, the conclusion of the Fourth Macedonian War effectively ended organized Macedonian resistance to Rome. The transformation of Macedon into a Roman province marked the final stage of a multi-decade process of conquest, political restructuring, and integration that had begun with the First Macedonian War in 214 BC. The province provided Rome with strategic depth, secure borders, and direct access to resources, while eliminating the threat of a restored Macedonian monarchy. The war reinforced the Republic's position as the principal power in Greece, and set the stage for subsequent interventions in the southern Greek peninsula, particularly regarding the Achaean League and the Peloponnesus. The Achaean War of 146 BC represented the culmination of decades of Roman involvement in Greek affairs and marked the final stage in the consolidation of Roman authority over mainland Greece. Following the conquest of Macedon in 148 BC, Rome maintained a structured provincial presence in the northern regions while overseeing the affairs of the Greek city-states through a combination of diplomacy, treaties, and military oversight. The Achaean League, a confederation of city-states in the Peloponnesus, had functioned with a significant degree of autonomy. Yet the League's political posture and actions increasingly conflicted with Roman interests. This tension, combined with internal dynamics within the League and Rome's strategic objectives, led to open confrontation, resulting in a decisive military campaign that ended organized Greek resistance and established Rome as the principal authority over the region. The Achaean League had emerged as a significant political and military entity in southern Greece, consolidating influence over multiple city-states, including Corinth, Megalopolis, Argos, and Sicyon. Its governance structure relied on a federal assembly of citizen representatives, magistrates, and military commanders, with strategic decisions made collectively. Following the Roman victory over Macedon and the establishment of the Macedonian province, the League faced increasing pressure to align its policies with Roman directives. While some member states advocated compliance and cooperation, others resisted, asserting the League's historical autonomy and challenging the extent of Roman authority in the southern Greek peninsula. These divergent perspectives created internal tensions that would influence the outbreak of war. The immediate causes of the conflict in 146 BC were multifaceted. Rome demanded that the Achaean League relinquish control over specific strategic locations, provide military support in line with Roman interests, and respect the terms imposed following previous regional conflicts. The League's leadership, particularly the strategoi and influential magistrates, perceived these demands as encroachments on their sovereignty. Diplomatic negotiations between Roman envoys and the Achaean assembly were protracted and ultimately unsuccessful, with mutual suspicion and competing objectives preventing reconciliation. The League's resistance was reinforced by a desire to preserve traditional civic authority, maintain control over local territories, and resist what it perceived as the imposition of foreign hegemony. By early 146 BC, tensions escalated into military confrontation. The Achaean League mobilized a substantial force estimated at approximately 30,000 infantry, including citizen soldiers drawn from member city-states, and a cavalry contingent of approximately 1,500 to 2,000 horsemen. The League's forces relied on a combination of traditional hoplite infantry formations and lighter units adapted to the hilly and coastal terrain of the Peloponnesus. Command and control were exercised through elected strategoi, who coordinated troop movements, logistical arrangements, and engagements with Roman forces. Supply lines were maintained through local contributions and requisitioned resources, although the decentralized nature of the League created challenges in coordination and uniformity of training. Roman forces, under the command of Consul Lucius Mummius, advanced into the Peloponnesus with legions numbering approximately 25,000 infantry and 2,500 cavalry, supplemented by allied contingents from Thessaly, central Greece, and the Aegean. Roman operational doctrine emphasized discipline, organization, and the integration of allied support. Supply lines were maintained through secure coastal bases and fortified positions along key routes. Roman strategy prioritized decisive engagements, sieges of strategic urban centers, and disruption of Achaean mobilization to ensure the rapid subjugation of the League. Initial engagements in 146 BC involved maneuvering, reconnaissance, and attempts to secure fortified positions in central and northern Peloponnesus. The Achaean League utilized its knowledge of local terrain to harass Roman forces, employing ambushes, defensive fortifications, and rapid cavalry raids to disrupt movement and supply chains. Roman legions, however, maintained cohesion, coordinated with allied forces, and conducted methodical advances toward strategic objectives. Skirmishes demonstrated the relative effectiveness of Roman training and discipline against localized resistance, setting the stage for larger-scale confrontations. The decisive phase of the conflict occurred at the city of Corinth, a major urban, economic, and military center in the northeastern Peloponnesus. Corinth held both strategic and symbolic significance, serving as a hub for trade, communication, and military organization within the League. Roman forces advanced on Corinth to neutralize the League's military capacity, securing the city as a base for further operations and demonstrating the consequences of resistance. The Achaean defenders mobilized all available forces, including citizens, mercenary units, and allied contingents from surrounding city-states. Defensive preparations included fortification of walls, stockpiling of supplies, and coordination of field forces to counter anticipated Roman maneuvers. The siege and subsequent assault on Corinth exemplified Roman military strategy in urban warfare. Roman legions employed systematic approaches, including the construction of circumvallation lines, coordinated artillery deployment with ballistae and siege engines, and continuous pressure on defensive positions. Achaean forces resisted through fortified positions, counterattacks, and attempts to disrupt Roman engineering efforts. Despite initial resistance, Roman coordination, superior logistical support, and disciplined troop deployment gradually undermined the city's defenses. Field engagements outside the city walls further weakened Achaean forces, preventing effective sorties and isolating the urban defenders. Following breaches in the fortifications and the collapse of organized defense, Roman forces captured Corinth. The conquest was executed with precision, with legions systematically securing key structures, neutralizing resistance, and establishing control over the urban population. The city's capture effectively terminated the military capability of the Achaean League. The destruction of Corinth was comprehensive, with key buildings, fortifications, and infrastructure rendered unusable, ensuring that the League could not rapidly reconstitute itself as a political or military entity. The fall of Corinth represented both a tactical and symbolic victory for Rome, demonstrating the consequences of defiance and establishing unambiguous authority over the Peloponnesus. In the aftermath, Rome implemented a comprehensive administrative and political reorganization across the former territories of the Achaean League. The League itself was dissolved, and its constituent city-states were placed under direct Roman oversight. Local governance structures were retained in limited forms for municipal administration, but ultimate authority rested with Roman officials. Military garrisons were stationed at strategic locations to prevent unrest, secure key routes, and monitor compliance with Roman directives. These measures ensured long-term stability, eliminated autonomous military capacity, and integrated the region into the broader framework of Roman provincial control. The incorporation of the Peloponnesus into the Roman sphere had significant economic implications. Rome controlled taxation, trade routes, and resource allocation, directing revenues to support both local administration and broader strategic objectives. Commerce, including access to the Corinthian Gulf and Aegean trade networks, was regulated to facilitate Roman economic interests and prevent concentrations of wealth that could fund future resistance. Agricultural production, including grain, olives, and wine, was monitored and taxed to ensure contributions to the provincial administration. The destruction of Corinth, a principal commercial hub, also reoriented trade flows toward Roman-controlled ports and cities, consolidating economic integration with the Republic. Socially, the dissolution of the Achaean League and imposition of Roman oversight altered civic and elite structures. Local aristocracies were incorporated into administrative roles, subject to Roman authority, preserving some continuity while limiting independent political influence. Civic institutions, assemblies, and magistracies continued to function for municipal administration but lacked strategic or military autonomy. Religious and cultural traditions persisted, providing continuity in daily life and reinforcing local identity, yet all operated within the constraints of Roman governance. The integration of the Peloponnesus reflected Rome's broader approach of maintaining local structures for administrative efficiency while ensuring ultimate control through military and political authority. Diplomatically, the conquest of the Achaean League established Rome as the undisputed authority in mainland Greece. Neighboring states, including independent Greek cities, leagues, and Hellenistic powers, recognized the consequences of resistance and the necessity of alignment with Roman objectives. Alliances, treaties, and interactions in the region henceforth required consideration of Roman oversight, demonstrating the Republic's capacity to project power, enforce compliance, and restructure political landscapes according to strategic priorities. The Achaean War served as a model for subsequent interventions and provincial management, reinforcing the principle that military victory must be consolidated through structural, administrative, and economic integration. The Achaean War, in conjunction with the earlier conquest of Macedon, effectively completed the process of Roman domination in the Greek mainland. Military campaigns, strategic urban control, and the dissolution of autonomous political entities established a framework of Roman authority that persisted in subsequent decades. The integration of southern Greece into the Roman sphere facilitated administrative uniformity, economic exploitation, and strategic security across the eastern Mediterranean. Greek city-states continued to operate in limited municipal capacities, but all aspects of military, political, and foreign affairs were subordinated to Roman oversight. From a military perspective, the conflict illustrated the continued effectiveness of Roman legions in confronting Hellenistic armies and fortified urban centers. Coordination with allied contingents, disciplined operations, and systematic siegecraft ensured the rapid subjugation of organized resistance. The campaign against the Achaean League confirmed lessons learned in previous wars against Macedon, including the importance of logistical preparation, combined arms operations, and integration of political oversight with military action. Economically, Rome consolidated control over key resources, trade networks, and urban centers. The capture of Corinth allowed Rome to dominate strategic maritime routes, redirect commercial flows, and secure revenue from taxation and tribute. Agricultural production and mining operations were integrated into provincial frameworks, contributing to the economic sustainability of Roman administration. The economic reorganization reinforced the strategic objective of preventing the resurgence of autonomous military or political power in the Peloponnesus. Culturally, while Greek traditions and institutions persisted, Roman authority increasingly influenced administrative practices, legal structures, and urban management. Civic engagement shifted toward municipal concerns, with strategic decisions and military authority centralized under Roman officials. The coexistence of cultural continuity with political subjugation established a model for the integration of Hellenistic regions into the Roman state, facilitating the long-term stability of Roman hegemony in the eastern Mediterranean. By the end of 146 BC, the Achaean War had conclusively ended organized Greek resistance in the mainland, completing the process initiated with the Roman intervention in Macedon decades earlier. The region's political landscape was fundamentally transformed, with direct Roman oversight replacing independent leagues and monarchies. Military, economic, and administrative systems were realigned to support Roman strategic interests, integrating the Peloponnesus into the broader network of territories under Roman control. The war confirmed Rome's position as the dominant power in Greece, establishing a framework for governance, resource management, and cultural interaction that would persist for centuries. Following the conclusion of the Achaean War in 146 BC, the Greek mainland came under full Roman authority, completing a series of military, political, and administrative measures that had unfolded over the preceding decades. The conquest of Macedonia, the suppression of Andriscus, and the decisive campaign against the Achaean League collectively established Roman hegemony in Greece. The aftermath involved the consolidation of military control, the restructuring of political institutions, the integration of economic systems, and the introduction of administrative mechanisms designed to secure stability and facilitate long-term Roman governance. Politically, Rome implemented a systematic framework to assert direct and indirect control over Greek territories. Macedonia was organized as a formal Roman province, with a governor appointed by the Senate who possessed military, judicial, and fiscal authority. Roman legions were stationed at strategic points to maintain order, enforce compliance, and respond to unrest. The governor supervised the administration of taxation, legal matters, and relations with local communities, ensuring that Macedon could not reconstitute independent military or political power. The dissolution of the tetrapolar republics eliminated previous semi-autonomous governance structures, creating centralized authority under Roman oversight. In southern Greece, formerly under the Achaean League, Roman authority operated through a combination of direct administration, garrisoning of key urban centers, and oversight of municipal governance. City-states retained limited local self-government for internal administrative tasks, including civic infrastructure, local courts, and municipal taxation for non-military purposes. Strategic and military decisions, however, were subordinated to Roman control. Former League officials were permitted to maintain ceremonial functions, but these were symbolic and subject to the oversight of Roman magistrates. The destruction of Corinth exemplified Rome's approach: decisive military action to neutralize centers of opposition, followed by administrative incorporation to prevent recurrence of organized resistance. The integration of Greek city-states into the Roman sphere required careful management of local elites. Aristocratic families, previously influential in republican councils or monarchical courts, were co-opted into municipal administration, serving as intermediaries between Roman authorities and local populations. Their roles were limited to civic matters, while military and foreign policy authority was reserved for Roman governors. This co-optation preserved social continuity, reduced potential resistance, and provided Rome with experienced administrators familiar with local political dynamics. Loyalty to Rome was incentivized through access to administrative positions, legal recognition of property and privileges, and occasional economic benefits tied to compliance. Military control remained a cornerstone of Roman governance. Permanent garrisons were established in strategic cities and along key transportation routes, including Corinth, Pella, Thessalonica, and other hubs in Macedonia and the Peloponnesus. These forces served multiple purposes: deterrence against rebellion, rapid response to local disturbances, and demonstration of Roman capacity to enforce authority. Recruitment of local auxiliary troops supplemented Roman legions, incorporating Greek manpower into military structures while maintaining oversight and limiting independent military organization. The deployment of disciplined legions ensured that no single city-state, league, or faction could challenge Roman supremacy. Economically, the integration of Greece into the Roman system involved the reorganization of taxation, trade, and resource management. Provinces and administered cities were required to remit tribute to Rome, which included monetary payments, agricultural produce, and raw materials such as timber and metals. This revenue supported both local administration and broader Roman strategic objectives, including military expenditure and infrastructure development. Trade routes across the Aegean and Adriatic were monitored and regulated to ensure that commerce served Roman interests. The destruction of key urban centers like Corinth allowed Rome to control commercial hubs, redirect trade flows, and prevent the concentration of wealth that might fund resistance movements. The Greek economy, while integrated into Roman structures, continued to operate at a regional level. Agricultural production remained central, with staple crops such as grain, olives, and wine forming the foundation of local subsistence and export. Mining operations, particularly for silver, iron, and other metals, were administered under Roman oversight to prevent diversion for military purposes. Merchant activity was increasingly linked to Roman commercial networks, with Roman oversight ensuring that key ports, roadways, and trade nodes facilitated strategic economic integration. This dual structure allowed local production and trade to continue, while consolidating revenue and resource control under Roman authority. Legal and administrative systems in Greece were gradually aligned with Roman models. Local courts continued to function for municipal disputes, property claims, and civil issues, but the ultimate judicial authority rested with the Roman governor. Appeals to Roman officials were possible in cases involving significant property, political disputes, or matters of provincial interest. The imposition of Roman law, alongside the retention of customary local law for civic affairs, created a hybrid legal framework that maintained social stability while asserting Roman supremacy. Administrative offices were standardized in alignment with Roman provincial practices, including taxation, census management, and regulatory oversight. Socially, the Roman conquest altered the dynamics of civic participation, elite influence, and population mobility. Greek elites maintained prestige through municipal roles, cultural patronage, and religious leadership, but their political authority was subordinated to Roman oversight. Citizen militias and local assemblies persisted, though their function was primarily ceremonial or administrative. Roman cultural influence, particularly in governance, military organization, and legal practice, began to permeate Greek society, even as Hellenistic traditions persisted in education, philosophy, architecture, and religious observances. This duality of cultural continuity and political subordination characterized the integration of Greece into the Roman system. Diplomatically, the incorporation of Greece solidified Rome's hegemony in the Eastern Mediterranean. Greek city-states, leagues, and regional powers recognized the consequences of defiance and the necessity of cooperation with Roman authorities. Alliances and treaties were adjusted to align with Roman strategic priorities, and Greek states relied increasingly on Roman arbitration to resolve intercity disputes, succession conflicts, and territorial disagreements. The consolidation of Roman authority provided regional stability while reinforcing the Republic's capacity to project power across the Hellenistic world. The administration of Greek provinces was accompanied by efforts to secure communication, infrastructure, and logistical support. Road networks, ports, and fortifications were maintained or constructed to facilitate troop movement, trade, and administrative coordination. These measures ensured that Roman oversight could be exercised efficiently across both Macedonia and the Peloponnesus. Infrastructure improvements not only enhanced strategic mobility, but also supported economic integration, enabling the rapid transport of goods, tribute, and military supplies throughout the region. Education and intellectual activity persisted under Roman administration, with local schools, philosophical academies, and cultural institutions continuing to operate. Greek scholars, philosophers, and rhetoricians contributed to civic life and occasionally engaged with Roman officials, providing expertise in administration, rhetoric, and diplomacy. The Roman presence did not suppress Hellenistic intellectual traditions. Rather, it facilitated interaction between Greek and Roman elites, fostering cultural exchange that would influence Roman governance, literature, and philosophy over subsequent centuries. Religious practices and civic rituals continued largely uninterrupted, though under Roman supervision to ensure public order. Temples, sanctuaries, and festivals remained central to civic life, and local religious authorities retained responsibilities for maintaining rites, supervising festivals, and mediating community affairs. The Roman administration recognized the utility of religious continuity in promoting social cohesion, utilizing traditional institutions to reinforce stability while ensuring allegiance to the Republic. The long-term consequences of Roman integration included the standardization of political structures, fiscal systems, and military oversight across Greece. Provinces were organized under a consistent hierarchy of authority, with governors responsible to the Senate and, ultimately, the Roman state. Military forces were deployed strategically to prevent insurrection, support economic exploitation, and secure transportation routes. Civic administration continued at the municipal level, providing functional governance while eliminating autonomous political or military power capable of challenging Rome. The integration of Greek territories exemplified Rome's model for managing conquered Hellenistic states, balancing local participation with overarching control. Economically, the integration facilitated the redistribution of resources and reorientation of trade networks to serve Roman interests. Maritime trade across the Aegean and Adriatic became increasingly directed toward Roman-controlled ports, ensuring both revenue collection and strategic oversight. Agricultural production and resource extraction were organized to supply provincial needs and support Roman military and administrative requirements. Economic integration reinforced political control, reducing the likelihood of local revolts fueled by resource-based independence or wealth accumulation. Socially and culturally, Greek communities experienced both continuity and adaptation under Roman authority. Civic identity, educational systems, and cultural practices persisted, while administrative, legal, and military structures reflected Roman organization. Elites adapted to the new framework, participating in municipal governance and interacting with Roman officials. The population as a whole adjusted to obligations imposed by provincial oversight, including taxation, conscription for auxiliary forces, and compliance with Roman legal and administrative directives. The Roman conquest of Greece between 214 BC and 146 BC was a protracted process shaped by successive conflicts, diplomatic interventions, and strategic restructuring of Greek political entities. The engagement began in the context of a fragmented Hellenistic world following the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC. By the early 3rd century BC, Macedon remained the dominant military power in northern Greece, while leagues such as the Achaean and Aetolian federations controlled parts of the Peloponnesus and central mainland. Interstate rivalries, territorial ambitions, and divergent political agendas prevented unified Greek resistance to external powers. Rome, emerging as a preeminent force in the Western Mediterranean, extended its influence through military campaigns in Italy and strategic diplomacy, creating the conditions for intervention in Greek affairs during the Punic Wars and their aftermath. The First Macedonian War, 214 to 205 BC, arose from Philip V of Macedon's attempts to exploit Rome's preoccupation with Hannibal during the Second Punic War. Macedonian naval deployments, territorial ambitions, and alliances with Carthaginian interests prompted Rome to coordinate with Greek powers, including the Aetolian League, Pergamon, and Rhodes. Although the conflict involved limited campaigns and shifting alliances and concluded inconclusively with the Peace of Phoenix in 205 BC, it established Rome as an emerging participant in Greek geopolitics, initiating a pattern of military intervention supported by local allies. The Second Macedonian War, 200 to 197 BC, further entrenched Roman involvement. Renewed aggression by Philip V prompted appeals from Pergamon and Rhodes for intervention, leading Rome to justify campaigns as a defense of Greek autonomy. Roman forces under Titus Quinctius Flamininus decisively defeated the Macedonian army at the Battle of Cynocephaly in 197 BC, demonstrating the tactical superiority of the Roman legion over the Macedonian phalanx. Following Philip's submission, Rome proclaimed the freedom of the Greeks at the Isthmian Games in 196 BC, solidifying influence without formal annexation and establishing precedent for indirect control over Greek political affairs. Roman intervention continued in the Eastern Hellenistic world during the Roman Seleucid War, 192 to 188 BC. The Achaean League invited Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire to intervene in Greece, creating a broader regional threat. Rome's military response culminated in the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC, and the Treaty of Apamea in 188 BC, which curtailed Seleucid power and removed external challenges to Roman dominance in Greece. The outcome reinforced Rome's role as arbiter of Greek affairs and undermined the autonomy of local states, further integrating Greece into the strategic orbit of the Republic. The Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BC, emerged with the accession of Perseus of Macedon, whose attempts to restore Macedonian influence alarmed Rome and allied Greek states. Campaigns across Macedon concluded with the decisive Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, destroying the Macedonian monarchy and the division of the territory into 4 republics under Roman oversight. The reorganization eliminated Macedon as an independent power, demonstrating Rome's capacity to translate battlefield victories into structural and administrative control. Instability persisted in Macedon, culminating in the Fourth Macedonian War, 150 to 148 BC, with the revolt of Andriscus, who claimed to be Perseus's son. His initial successes were met with a coordinated Roman military response led by Quintus Caecilius Metellus, culminating in the decisive defeat of Andriscus and the formal establishment of Macedon as a Roman province. The war illustrated the persistence of monarchist loyalties, the limitations of indirect control, and the necessity of direct provincial administration to secure enduring Roman authority. The final phase of conquest occurred with the Achaean War in 146 BC, prompted by the League's resistance to Roman oversight. The mobilization of Achaean forces and the subsequent siege and destruction of Corinth marked the definitive end of organized Greek resistance. Rome dissolved the League, imposed direct oversight of city-states, and stationed garrisons to maintain order. Political, economic, and military authority shifted decisively to Roman hands, integrating southern Greece into the Republic's administrative and strategic framework. Following 146 BC, Greece was incorporated into the Roman system through a combination of provincial governance, local municipal administration, and military oversight. Macedonia functioned as a formal province under a Roman governor, while southern Greek city-states retained limited civic autonomy under the supervision of Roman officials. Taxation, trade regulation, legal frameworks, and military deployments were centralized to ensure compliance, prevent insurrection, and integrate the region into the wider Roman economic and strategic network. Local elites participated in municipal governance, but were subordinated to Roman authority, and Greek cultural, educational, and religious institutions continued under supervision, facilitating continuity alongside administrative integration. The conquest of Greece completed Rome's dominance over the eastern Mediterranean, establishing a template for the management of Hellenistic territories through a combination of military superiority, administrative restructuring, economic integration, and cultural accommodation. Roman hegemony reshaped the political landscape, dissolved autonomous leagues and monarchies, and subordinated Greek city-states to provincial oversight, while simultaneously enabling cultural exchange and the diffusion of Hellenistic traditions into Roman society. By consolidating control over both Macedonia and the Peloponnesus, Rome secured strategic depth, stabilized regional trade networks, and established enduring mechanisms for the governance of its eastern provinces, laying the foundation for centuries of Roman authority in Greece.